reaction. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee and Fox News contributor Ari Fleischer. Good to see you both, Governor Huckabee. I mean, I think everything that we could possibly say about Joe Biden has been said. But when you see this, and it is, look, whatever cognitive issues he has, it is degenerative. It never gets better. It only gets worse. It seems the getting worse part seems to have accelerated in recent months. Would you agree with that?
It'd be hard not to agree with that. I'm just sitting here watching thinking, man, I sure picked the wrong year not to run for president. I should have gone ahead and done it now. You know, this is really disturbing.
So you're saying confidently you would have beaten Donald Trump? I know you like Trump. You're telling Donald Trump on national TV tonight you'd beat him?
Nah, no way. I'm supporting him and have been since he announced for re-election and supported him in 2016. He's really the best hope we have to get this country back on track, secure the border, make it so that people can afford their bacon, butter, and bread, which they can't do right now for the most part, unless they have Joe Biden's salary, which most Americans don't. This is a tragedy, and the tragedy is that Democrats and the media keep covering for him. And I think the more that the American people see what you just showed, they're going to look at this, and those numbers with blacks, Hispanics, and young people are only going to continue to crater for Joe Biden. People look at this and they say, I don't care whether I like this guy, can't even say if I like his policies, which I can't imagine they would. But this man is not capable of leading the country. I think of watching a scene from The Sixth Sense and Haley Joel Osment, and he looks around and he says, I see dead people. That's who he sees. He sees Mitterrand instead of seeing Macron. I mean, this is bizarre stuff.
Well, I agree with every bit of it. I think maybe what is even more interesting is his Vice President Harris, Ari Fleischer, her approval rating's lower than his. How's that possible?
Yeah, that's really an accomplishment, isn't it? And if I'm Donald Trump, I will remind everybody that it's highly likely that Kamala Harris will be the president of the United States if Joe Biden somehow is able to win the election. That will scare a lot of people. But I want to go to this issue, Sean, because it's so much worse than him not remembering the name of Hamas. If you had actually begun that tape about 10 seconds earlier, what you would have witnessed was the United States president struggling to recall the briefing he got about the status of negotiations between Israel and Hamas. He could not remember the details. You saw the wheels turning in his head, the cobwebs trying to be swept out of the way. He couldn't remember it. He was struggling. The same thing happened, Sean, in the lead up to the Afghanistan withdrawal. He said that nobody in the military told him he could have left a smaller number of troops in Afghanistan and therefore maybe saved those lives of the 13 Marines. He said nobody told him that was an option. And then he was contradicted by his own military saying, no, he was briefed about that. This is what happens when the president cannot recall his briefings. It's deadly serious. It's not just he didn't remember the name of Hamas. He doesn't remember the things he's told earlier, hours earlier in the Oval Office. That puts all Americans in danger. That's the problem with a president at that age.
All right, so I'll throw it to you, Ari, first. We're 271 days away from Election Day. All right, does he survive till that point? Do you buy into any of these? I would argue that they're just educated guesses of people that the Democrats maybe at the convention will look to somebody else to take his place. Do you believe that, or does he survive?
Well, first, if Huckabee throws his hat in the ring, nobody stands a chance. That's just obvious.
Well, there might be. There's rumors that there might be a Huckabee on the ticket, though, Ari. It might not be the one on the show,
true.
But there is rumors about that.
I didn't say if it would be the good Huckabee or the very good Huckabee.
Yeah.
But here's the thing about Biden and the Democratic convention. If he continues to lose in the polls to Donald Trump, the Democrats, especially the superdelegates going into that August convention, are going to be in panic. They don't love Joe Biden, but what they do is hate Donald Trump. So if there is a likelihood that Joe Biden would lose to Donald Trump, there will be a panic, and they're going to have to look for somebody else. I give that about a 1 in 3 odds that that'll happen. But I also want to say, Sean, I think in October, those groups that you showed that are losing faith, losing support for Joe Biden right now, they're going to come home. Republicans should not fool themselves into thinking that they're going to do fantastically better with blacks, Hispanics, or younger people. They're sending signals right now that they're very distressed with Biden. I think Donald Trump is going to do better with blacks, Hispanics, and young people, but not that well. Those groups are largely going to come home in October. It'll be a close election.
Historically, that's exactly what has happened. I think Republicans have gotten their hopes up. I'm hoping one day that certain, identity groups, if you want to call them, that they get the message that maybe this party that comes every 2 and 4 years and makes promises is not doing a good job for them. All right, how does this play out, Governor Huckabee?
I think there's a better chance that we will keep some of those voters among blacks, Hispanics, and young people. I agree with Ari. It's not going to be the magnificent numbers, but some of them will just stay home. They're not going to go vote for Joe. They may not vote for Trump, but they won't vote for Joe. But I'll tell you what I'm watching. I'm watching mothers of 4 children in Boston who are angry because her kids can't go to the community center and play basketball because it's filled up with illegal immigrants. They're getting gift cards. She's getting shown the door. And you keep doing that through November, and a lot of those folks, out of sheer anger and frustration, they'll vote for Donald Trump and say it can't be worse.
The fascinating thing is them trying to put this on the Republicans, and everybody knows this was policy from day one of Joe Biden. That little game has not been successful, even with the help of pretty much the entire media mob running interference and being an extension of the Biden campaign press office. Anyway, appreciate you both. Ari Fleischer, thank you. Governor, thank you.